Side Quest tells the story of a chef that becomes a hero by sheer chance, and has to fight his way to save the princess for $9.99. And before I begin, this key was obtained from the developer for review purposes, but it won't change my opinion in the game in the end if the next 5 minutes doesn't make that clear. Look, I'm sensitive to small developers starting out, because you've gotta start somewhere. And Side Quest does at least nail its content with the name of the game's title. Now this would be great, except for the fact that the quest in question is one of those fetch quests that are mundane, boring, and is there to fill time. Sadly, this game put me to sleep, literally, and that is indicative of the major problems the game has from the start to the finish. You move your chef to battle enemies on a 2D plane, where you face waves of baddies over and over and over again. And here's where the problems start. Combat is bland. You've got a melee and a ranged attack, and that's it. You basically will need to find the range in which to hit your enemy without being hit yourself, and then rinse and repeat. There's no advanced tactics. Hell, there's barely any basic tactics here. Look, I've talked about the KISS principle, aka keep it simple stupid, in games before, but that only extends so far. Sure, there can be an enjoyment about slashing an enemy with a sword, but there's multiple parts into how that can be fun. It can be visually appealing, giving a feast for the eyes. You can do it with sheer numbers, having the player attempt to deal with overwhelming odds. Or you can do it with simple skills, guarding, blocking, dodging. All of these add something simple, but something of substance to improve on it. Side Quest does none of these things, and it shows. Quickly. Otherwise, your game gets repetitive rather quickly. You can't just rely on enemies with more health, or a mixture of ranged and melee attacks as mentioned before, because the player isn't going to be engaged. The medium here requires player interaction, and if they don't want to interact, they won't want to play. Just like me in this case. The level design will throw a curveball once in a while, by putting you in a situation where you're limited into jumping into the foreground and background, and that was a good concept. Until it became apparent that it was going to be reused over and over again. You need more things like this in the game, more wrinkles into the gameplay. But if you don't have many wrinkles, those wrinkles become apparent rather quickly, and they become boring, mundane. Sure, there are boss monsters that up the ante to a certain extent with a couple of attacks that have been seen before. This boss fight is probably the highlight of what I played, and it was 4 times longer than it needed to be. It summed up the game rather well. Hit, run, rinse, repeat, and do it repeatedly until you've grinded the gameplay down so much that there's nothing left to show. The game doesn't help itself technically by being all over the place. Look, I don't expect a masterpiece here, but the art assets are so inconsistent. That building in the background, it's not bad. But then you look at some of the character models, and they aren't even close to the same art style or quality. It gives way to an uneven presentation. And while the plot delivery is going for cringeworthy yet self-parody-like dialogue, it just never really hits the mark because of everything else. See, that's because that dialogue is a complement to everything else. And if it's got nothing to complement, well, you know. And then on top of that, there's technical issues, in particular with jumping in and out of the background and the range of hitting enemies. In certain cases, enemies, and yourself at times, become invulnerable, despite seemingly whacking them within the range of your sword. Look, when it comes down to it, Side Quest has no oomph. It has no if factor. It has no appeal that I can point to and say, yeah, that's something that I can say people will like. It's bland. And that's a cardinal sin in the world of gaming nowadays, where there's so many people out there doing something interesting. And because of that, it doesn't get a recommendation on any level from me. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.